Comp planning can be complicated any day. It can be a lot more complicated during a period of wage inflation and a pandemic. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about comp planning on Culture Builder Live. Why, hello there. I'm Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, the news organization with a community of professionals we help companies hire from. So there's a little thing called wage inflation happening. We have a giant rise in quit rates in the last year and a half in the United States. And we're experiencing wage inflation for a whole bunch of reasons. So comp planning is probably a stressful reality for many HR leaders, entrepreneurs, other execs. We're going to talk a bit about comp planning. I'm going to do that with Graham Collins. He's chief of staff over at Quotapath, which is a automated commission tracking software platform. Graham, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
It's a pleasure. So, Graham, we technically have covered Quotapath a fair bit. You guys do mostly focus on quota carrying folks, hence the Quotapath name. But you've had a bit of experience in other sectors around comp planning, obviously growing a handful of SaaS companies. So we're going to touch on a bunch. We'll use kind of our sales and sales adjacent folks as an example. But why don't you start me off, call nonsense on me. How different an environment are we in right now? Is this pure kind of just talk, or is something different now than, say, 2019, 2017? What's your thought about how different things are?
Yeah, good question. Things are pretty different. Things are pretty different in
Okay.
sales comp.
Validated. Good. This is good.
Yeah, for sure. So in between 2020 and 2021, we saw anywhere between, depending on who you ask, 10 and 25% increases in on-target earnings for salespeople. So base salary plus any applicable commissions or bonuses is your on-target earnings. But interestingly, we haven't seen the quotas increase commensurate with that. So a lot of folks are leaving their current jobs, going to new jobs, making 10 to 25% more, but not necessarily expected to sell anymore, which is strange because generally when the amount you're earning goes up,
right,
you're expected to sell.
Logical.
Yeah.
And is your stance like this is good? Hey, employees grabbing more? Does this feel unsustainable? Like, what's your stance on? Do you have a feeling about good or bad?
Yeah, I don't have a feeling good or bad necessarily. I am no longer in the sales game, so I guess I have a slight twinge of jealousy there that I'm not earning 25% more than I was the previous year. But I think that oftentimes there's just more of an understanding around sales comp and what salespeople are worth. And, I know that this is a controversial opinion at times, but salespeople are oftentimes the highest paid people in the company. I know there are famous stories of Mark Benioff handing $1 million commission checks out on stage where folks are making $1 million just as a sales rep. And so, good or bad, it's just the natural way of how things are, where people are earning higher commission checks for selling, maybe about the same amount of money.
I'd love to get. I mean, maybe we'll close out with some thoughts about like how you think this plays out over time. But let's try to make this actionable for folks, for founders, for HR pros, for other kind of hiring managers, team leads, executives that are watching. You think it's a different environment now than it's been in the past. So you're arguing, even if you are experienced in leading sales teams, if it's a different environment, suddenly not all of your experience might be applicable. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about what do we got to be keeping in mind when we look at next year? We're reaching year end here. I got to feel like there's a lot of people looking at budgeting and team planning. What are you advising companies to be keeping in mind when they're looking at their 2022 plans?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing is that there are a lot of competition for salespeople and sales adjacent roles, and so you're probably not the only person giving a sales rep an offer. And so there are a few things that you can do in order to in 2022 in order to make those more appealing. that there are a few things. I'm a big fan of very lucrative accelerators. No salesperson in the world thinks they're an average salesperson. In sales. And so providing these really lucrative accelerators and saying, yeah, your base salary may be $75,000 and your on target commission is $75,000, making 150, but our top performers are making 200, 250, $300,000 because of these lucrative accelerators. So part of it is knowing that, and then also understanding that comp transparency is a differentiator. If you have as part of the interview process, you roll out exactly how somebody can make their money, that's a differentiator versus having a comp plan where it's super opaque and there are 1,000 different ways that folks can earn money, and there's sort of a black box. So knowing that, understanding that, and being able to talk to it, it can be a huge differentiator. Second thing that's really interesting that I'm seeing for 2022 are changes in the way that sales reps are ramping up. A lot of people are hiring. Probably most people who are listening to this are hiring, building, growing their sales team, and that ramp period is making some changes as well. Where it used to be you maybe got a draw for 3 to 6 months while you were ramping up. There are a lot of changes now where more creative things where you get paid for completing training and paid to build your pipeline. So there are different ways that new hires can be incentivized that don't necessarily have to do with just the way that they're getting paid.
I mean, the transparency bit is particularly important. Obviously, we have had a important conversation around salary transparency in all organizational roles. Sales, obviously, any variable compensation role can get trickier. I've heard a number of folks from the Quotapath team note and kind of advise against keeping things simpler when possible. Do you think that is an evolution that is being sped by a competitive hiring environment and retention environment that, as you alluded to, if transparency is seen as an asset, maybe we'll see more of it because there's such a demand for retaining and attracting talent overall and sellers specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope that there is more transparency. There are a few things that I always note, which is standardized comp plans. If you don't have a standardized comp plan, if each salesperson can come in and negotiate how much what their quota is, what their base salary is, what you end up doing is generally underpaying women and people of color. And there's a bunch of HBS studies around this. And so standardizing these comp plans, making them transparent, having different levels. You can have an account executive and a senior account executive and an enterprise account executive. But they have to be logical and they have to be standardized, and people have to have an understanding of how they get from one role to the next. It can't just be like, this person felt like a senior account executive, or maybe they get promoted after a year if they do well. Creating this transparency and this structure around this, again, is a recruiting mechanism and a retention mechanism, because I know if I'm at a company for 9 months and I hit quota 6 out of the 9 months, or 2 out of the 3 quarters, or 2 quarters in a row, or what have you, I get promoted to the next band. That's an incentive for me to stick around and an incentive for me to join a company where I have clear trajectory in my career.
Can we linger a bit more on this divide on attraction and retention? I so often comp conversations are, and particularly in the last year, have been about attracting new folks. That I think it's important that we remember existing teammates. I think that seems like a logical point I'd want to call out. And you touched on that a minute ago, but talk to me a little bit about how you would advise, again, founders, HR pros, other execs, folks who are making these kinds of decisions when they're looking at both hiring needs. What else should they be keeping in mind when they're thinking of retaining their existing teams?
Yeah, for sure. So one of there's that old adage, like, one of the easiest ways to make more money is to quit your job and move to another job. And that's absolutely true. And you want to make that not necessarily the case. So
right. It feels like it's an adage we want to add that to the dustbin, but we haven't quite universally done so.
Right. Exactly. And so a big thing is making it easy for people to earn money that they might earn at other places. So having a logical, well thought out, well built comp plan that rewards your top performers and yeah, I want to keep my top performers, but I don't want to keep my bottom performers. And so a big thing that I've been seeing recently is combining those accelerators with actually a decelerator. And so if you're at 50% of quota, you're not earning half the amount of money that a person who gets 100% of their quota earns. You're earning 25% or 20%.
Mm,
And in turn, we take that money. I say that the bottom performers pay for the top performers. So we take that decelerator and add it in as an accelerator for top performers. The second thing is career path and career trajectory. Nobody wants to. Well, I mean, some people do, I'm sure, but not many people want to leave their job because they're comfortable. Hey, I know this. I know how to sell it. It's a good product. So make it easier for them to stay than it is for them to leave and learn a new product. And so if you create this career trajectory, and that doesn't always mean moving into a management position. So often salespeople think, oh, I have to move into a management position in order to make more money or move in my career. No, sometimes it's an enterprise role. So it may involve creating these bands that I talked about, where you have the account executives and then the senior and then the team lead or what have you. So creating that, talking to your people, understanding where their career aspirations are, and building that in your own organization.
I want to turn here the last couple of minutes over to where we're going. So, everyone loves a future looking question during a pandemic. We technically have done a whole bunch of reporting on the somewhat flattening, the meeting in the middle on tech and tech adjacent salaries, as higher cost tech centers are increasingly hiring from lower cost centers. So that gap is shrinking between higher and lower cost centers. There's also just a huge distribution or disruption to overall hiring. Childcare needs has radically changed how many people look at work. There's a lot happening here. Do you have a more medium or longer term range view out a few years about how many of these trends you've called out continue? I imagine, just doing math, 10 to 25% year on year increases in take home without increasing quota, that logically doesn't seem like that can happen forever. So what are you seeing happens post 2022 or even in medium range? What's the future
Yeah.
of comp looking like?
So a big thing that I talk about when building comp plans is an on-target earnings, which again is your base salary plus your commission, an on-target earnings to quota ratio. And so that's an annual quota. So the SaaS industry standard has always been thrown out as a 5x. So if I'm making 100,000 on target earning, my annualized quota is 500,000 ARR. However, if you increase that on target earnings and don't increase that quota, then that ratio gets slightly askew. I think that what happens over time is we see this big influx in salaries and increase in on target earnings. I don't see it increasing at 10 to 25%. I think that's more of a right sizing to where folks feel like they should have been all along. But over the next couple of years, that quota ratio returns to normal. The 5x, what may be a 4x or 3x right now will return back to that 5x ratio.
Yeah, that seems like a truth. Grant, that's super helpful. We're going to drop links below the video and in the recap article, both to Quotapath, a tool for helping you guide some of the commission tracking over time, and offer the transparency that he called out. We'll also give links to a couple webinars and other deep dives that Graham is doing. He does some sessions with folks around comp planning. And we will continue to watch how this shifts. As usual, this has been your Culture Builder Live. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much, everybody.